What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Sheehan Show here on Sherdog.com. My name is Sean Sheehan. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by Harry Powell. If you don't know him, he is the host of a number of podcasts over on Severe MMA, co-hosts the weekly preview show, the review show, the Balance Breakdown, Speaker's Corner, and does an absolutely fantastic job over there. So if you're not following him, follow him at BJJ_Harry Powell. And I have Harry on with me today because his wonderful podcast, the podcast Speaker's Corner, talks about maybe the overarching parts of mixed martial arts, not necessarily the how to throw a jab or who's next for the title shot or things like that, but like the maybe some of the issues that we don't talk about on a week-to-week basis. And the one I wanted to talk about today, because of a number of fighters who have fought recently, is like how big experiences, and not just that, but how big and how meaningful being at different parts of your career can be. And we have Israel Adesanya coming up this weekend, who is obviously the champion of the world right at the very top. Last weekend we had Caolan Loughran, who fought after 8 fights in his career, which was really kind of 6 fights in his career because the first 2 were against like proper journeymen. And then we have other people, say like Rhys McKee, who's in his second stint. We have someone like, say, an Erin Blanchfield or a Manon Fiorot, who are just there kind of at the apex, and a few more people as well we will bring in and discuss throughout this. Harry, thank you very much for joining me. How are you today? And I know we've spoken a little bit about this before, even on Sherdog, but how big do you think it is that we are? You look at, say, 3 pay-per-view or 3 UFC events in a row, and you can pick out so many different fighters, and the winning and losing of the fight almost boils down to that, to the experience, to the level where they have reached in their career. Not necessarily their ability, not necessarily where they can go, but where they are right now. It's really massive, isn't it?
Yeah. Firstly, thank you very much for having me again. I appreciate it. Secondly, I think there's when we sort of look out at the hierarchy of traits that are needed to be an elite level MMA fighter, or even just a competitive MMA fighter at the pro level, there's like a real broad spectrum of them, but a lot of them sit under the hierarchical tree of experience. You can't get skills without experience, because you need time on the gym. In the gym, you need time on the mats. You can't get experience of what a fight feels like without having gone through camps, without having gone through weight cuts, without having gone through the walks, without having gone through sitting in those lockers in those sports halls at amateur days and early pro days, and actually going out and doing the fighting. You can't get experience of wins and losses, like the after effects of a fight, without having done them. You don't get experience of press conferences, or dealing with different fight weeks, or dealing with traveling to a different country and fighting under a different organization with different rules and all these sorts of things, without having done them. And so I think experience, even outside of maybe specifically what we're talking about when you mentioned Caolan Loughran and Taylor Lapilus, which was absolutely a fight determined by experience rather than pure skill. I think it's fair to say that Lapilus used the experience and the adjacent skills gained from that experience to win that fight against Caolan Loughran. But you also saw that there are other traits that Caolan was using, and his own levels of skill, to make that an extremely competitive fight for 2 rounds and 3 quarters, I guess. But I think for me, the specific point on experience is, and where some of the fighters you've listed, is there is a tipping point. And we talk about primes, and we talk about peaks, and we talk about, athletic abilities and all this stuff. But there is a really, really thin and narrow window in MMA where there's an alliance and sort of an osmosis meeting of the tires left on the tread is the thing we try and say, right? Which is just damage taken versus damage dealt. So your body's ability to enact the experience you've gained, the actual experience gained itself. And then I think something that isn't talked about, and that pairs specifically with experience, is sort of personal maturity. You look at a fighter like Ian Garry, and you look at the performance that he just put on most recently, and you go and look at his performance on his debut against James Sheehan in Cage Warriors, and you can feel that the maturity of the man outside of the cage in his personal life completely affects the way in which his fighting style has changed. The personal maturity took him to America. It took him to a gym whereby he felt like he was a very small fish in a very large pond, so that he could access as much experience and skill as possible. So I couldn't agree more with you that the level of experience really at that top of the hierarchical tree infiltrates and affects so many of the other traits we see in MMA.
100%. And the fight you made an example of there, the Caolan Loughran Taylor Lapilus fight, maybe is the one we kind of start with here. Because I think it's a very interesting fight, because maybe if people, maybe if you're in the States and stuff, obviously Caolan Loughran's Irish, and we followed him throughout his whole journey, as a pro mostly, but as a bit of an amateur as well, obviously. But it's funny because Caolan Loughran is a good and bad example of this, right? Because I think he has actually outweighed his experience levels massively. Because as I said, okay, he's 9 fights now into his career, but coming into this 8 fights, 2 of which were kind of, were against Rhys Street and Will Cairns, which, some people would argue they don't even count as fights. So 6 real fights. And in that, he beat a Cage Warriors champion and beat one of the top prospects in Cage Warriors as well. And I would even argue in his fight against Taylor Lapilus, he actually fought way above the experience level of someone like him. I think the right attitude to enter that fight with was to wrestle. And you see people at a way higher level in terms of rankings and stuff who give up on that wrestling early in a fight where they have to continue to wrestle throughout it. Even Spivak a little bit in the main event, and he continued to do it. The thing about it is, and the problem with Caolan, right, is you mentioned the tipping point there at the top, but there's also a kind of an entry level tipping point, if you want to put it like that, where you can be say Caolan, he's a young guy with a lot who is probably overachieved in terms of the level of experience he has, but still that level of experience is the thing that probably drew him back on that. He wasn't that far away from winning that fight. If he'd won a minute in the 3rd round, he could have won the fight. But the last minute of the 3rd round was probably his worst minute in the whole fight. And what does that come down to? I actually would argue it comes down to the experience of Lapilus more than him, because Lapilus was on his bike, he was touching him up, he was hitting him with shots and really kind of taking away even the thought of that takedown. But it's not even that, right? I would argue that the bigger part of that is Caolan adjusting in future because of that. So you always hear great teams, and my great Limerick team who have the thing up here by me. I was watching back one of the games last night, and so this could be any sport, but they were 5 points down in the final game, and they went down and they won by 9 points, right? And one of the players was interviewed afterwards, and they were asked about that point in the game, and he goes, well, we have reference points. We have this game, and we could reference that and go on and go, okay, we haven't lost here, let's go and win. Caolan Loughran has no reference point for that. Now he does. Now he's a reference point. That is the situation I found myself in. In future, you go on and you reference that and go, here's what I need to do. And at this point, whether it's just a different entry, whether it's I'm going to strike for 30 seconds to set up a takedown rather than going takedown sort of thing. That, I think, is massive. And sometimes we say, experience matters, and we actually don't delve into why it matters. But that's a big part of it, Harry, isn't it?
For sure. And, I think it's going to be difficult to describe it properly, and I'll just sort of have a go. But I think there's an element with Caolan that he is a tipping point on a global level in a lot of ways, because when you see fighters coming through now, okay, he's not the youngest in age, right? But he's certainly the youngest in fight time. I think what we're going to see as we move through modern MMA is the coaching is becoming so much more efficient that guys like Caolan, with a skill set that he has, are going to come out of the woodwork way more at 6 fights deep, because when you are coaching efficiently, the skill set, not necessarily some of the experiences we've talked about, the experiences of being on the mat, guys are going to have less experience on the mat because they're learning more efficiently. So then they're going to need to spend less hours on the mat to get a higher net result of skill. They're going to not necessarily have to compete as much in an amateur career or as a pro career in order to test those skills because the training is going to become more efficient. However, when you have somebody like Caolan, the answer was very obvious from round one. It was that he didn't have a way around the jab as efficiently as he would like. He found a way around the jab, and he found a way around the jab maybe less technically than he would prefer. He just bundled his way through some jabs. He landed some counters. He pulled the jab and ducked underneath it and tried to get inside. And when that wasn't working, the thing that you said is he just stuck to the game plan and believed in the game plan. And I think he has reference points, just not as large as those ones, because the reference points are going to be when he's on the mat, and let's say he's trying to take Darren Till down, and he just can't take him down, and he can't take him down, and he can't take him down. Colin Heron watching on that sparring session is going to be like, just try something different. He's like, your aim is to take him down. Like, what are we doing here? You carry on, you push forward, and you take the man down. Now, don't get me wrong. As we've rightly said, if we're going to analyze the fight a little bit further, that final minute, I think Caolan realized he needed something big, but he made the wrong choice as to what big was. He made the choice that I'm going to try and stand in the pocket, pull this guy in and trust in my power shots. Lapilus was like, yeah, that's grand. I've got better head movement than you have because I've been in this situation more than you have. Again, alluding to experience, right? He's developed the skills in order to navigate those situations a little bit more superiorly than, I don't think that's a word, a little bit in a more superior fashion than Caolan has right now. But as you say, under those bright lights in front of that crowd, after the week he had, all of that is just invaluable levels of experience.
100%. Without shadow of a doubt. Another person I want to just mention is Erin Blanchfield, because we saw her fighting against Talia Santos, right? And I think it's interesting because I'm looking at Erin's record here, and you look at even some of the cancelled fights she's had, right? She was supposed to fight Talia Santos. She was supposed to fight the likes of Norma Dumont, Macy Barber, but she did fight Miranda Maverick, who's a very good fighter. She fought JJ Aldrich, who brings something, as with Manon McCann, and then she beat Jessica Andrade, which was obviously a massive thing in her career. And you watch that Talia Santos fight. I want to throw this over to you pretty quickly here, Harry, but like, you watch that fight and she's arguably one round down. It's not going amazingly for her. She's not dominating this fight. You look at that Molly McCann fight, right? And you kind of think, oh, she's going to go and dominate everyone here in this fashion. And even she did a tough enough start against Jessica Andrade, but then went on to kind of dominate. When she can't do that against Talia Santos, and it's weird, right? Because you could easily be forgiven if you're Erin Blanchfield for getting drawn into kind of say, Talia Santos, she's a good fighter, but is she as good as me? Is she as good as the people at the very top of that division? This is kind of just the next fight I have to win, and then I'll be fighting for a title shot. And then you find yourself a round down. You find yourself in a position where if I lose another 30 seconds in this fight, possibly in this position, I could be in a place where I have to really fight back, and and let's say she gets knocked down, or Santos lands a big shot, where you're fighting for your life here just to win this fight. Never mind fighting for the title. Never mind getting to the very top of the division. How big is that? Like, and she's not the most experienced fighter in the world either. She's only 13 fights into her career. But she showed, and there's a bigger point around this as well, I feel like, and we've spoken about this before, but gaining experience is probably happening earlier to some fighters now than it ever has before, and I think she's a very, very good example of this. But that turnaround at that point in that Santos fight, that is massive for her. I'll say, I mentioned, and probably mentioned it again a few times, but the reference point for that, where you're like, and it's not like her whole career is on the line or anything, but her whole contendership at this stage is on the line, and she turns it around and wins the fight from that point. That is something that you look at, and she's probably belying her experience there, are you really, isn't she?
Without a shadow of a doubt. But then that's like an auxiliary trait that's specific to Erin Blanchfield. And you mentioned the Talia Santos one because it's the most recent one, but in that JJ Aldrich fight, JJ Aldrich was beating the face off her for about a minute and a half, 2 minutes. And then Erin did exactly the same thing as she did with Talia Santos. And that's, you just find a way to win. And I think that finding a way to win is sort of structured out of a couple of different parts of scaffolding. The first is you have to be well-rounded, right? Let's say you go out there and you put a striking display on like you did against Jessica Andrade. Congratulations. That's fantastic. That's a beautiful win. It's a beautiful display. But you go out against Talia Santos in your next one and you're getting smashed in that first round. Like, it wasn't a 10-8, but it was a really dominant 10-9, right? There was absolutely no question about it whatsoever. She couldn't find range. She was getting hit with big shots. She couldn't find her head movement. She couldn't find her rhythm, and it was not a good round. And then she gets in at the end and her corner says, like, what are we doing? Let's make this an MMA fight. And it's almost like she remembers, right? Oh yeah, I can do other things. And my experience isn't that I have to get drawn into this and I have to do this and I have to do that. There are special types of fighters who can make mistakes and adapt immediately. We talk about Demetrius Johnson all the time. Why? Because one of his innate fundamental superpowers was something would happen in a fight and it would fail and he would immediately change it. Immediately. He just try something different. If it worked, amazing, we carry on. If it doesn't work, you change it again. And for Erin Blanchfield to come out in that second round and not entertain any of the striking and then just immediately start grappling, and obviously her grappling is fantastic, she was able to lean on the first structure of the scaffolding, which is skills. But the second one, and I think this is where it's a really interesting debate, is the confidence to go out and enact those skills, to believe in those skills. Caolan Loughran had it, and okay, he ended up on the losing side of a very close decision against Lapilus. But Erin Blanchfield had it, and she managed to pull it out the bag against Talia Santos, right? And there is an element to confidence that only comes from either delusion, maybe that's not a conversation for today, but MMA fighters have that in spades, but also an experience. Because if you asked a white belt grappler, right, or how confident would you be about teaching a class on deep half guard? The answer is not confident. Like, Conor McGregor just got his black belt 2 days ago. If you say, Conor, how confident do you feel about teaching a class about deep half? His confidence is going to be numerically vastly different than that white belt you've just asked. Why? Because he spent 20 years on the mats. Because he's seen John Kavanagh and Lee Hammond and Owen Roddy and Paddy Houlihan and whoever it is teaching 1,000 classes, 10,000 classes about deep half guard. And so where Erin Blanchfield is a rare cookie, and I think where this experience arc has some misnomers and has some sort of outliers, is when the confidence comes without the necessary, or what we determine to be necessary, experience itself.
I think that's so interesting. I think that's so interesting because you look at, let's say you look at the Rhys McKee fight, right? Where I actually think experience, one, kept him in that fight, and two, like, almost had him winning the fight towards the end, but still ended up losing because MMA at its core, it's so unpredictable. And I do a betting show every week, and I almost feel bad about doing it because, like, it's just so utterly unpredictable. Like, I spoke to Rhys the other day, and I was like, oh, sure, go in there, avoid the right hand, and use your length and stuff, and it's a winnable fight. And 30 seconds into the fight, there's a right hand down through the middle, you're dropped, you get taken down, and then the whole fight changes, right? And Rhys did a good job and he survived, and like the second round he's had to survive again, a big barrage, and then the third round he won the third round apart from one judge who probably shouldn't be judging, and almost got a finish in the fight. And even the first round was relatively close, it could have got that and the judge's card didn't, and I think rightly so, but could have won the fight because that drug him through. But you look at, say, and we spoke about this as well, you look at the reference points for him, and it's, look, the Chimaev fight, which went badly, the Morono fight, which is a better reference point, because the Chimaev fight is, you can almost throw that out. But the Morono fight, I don't think he did in the Morono fight what he did in this one, which was kind of to drag himself back into it and to, like, almost win a fight which he lost. And it's funny because he mentioned it to me, the Jimmy Wallet fight. And his winning of that fight against a guy who was a UFC veteran was a big point for him, a big reference point for him, because he didn't do it against Morono. He wasn't able to come through it. And it's I think it's crazy, and I'm very interested to know your opinion on this, because sometimes you go in there with a game plan, right? And I'm sure Rhys's game plan, and we've seen it out of Rhys a long time. We've seen it in the Jimmy Wallhead fight. We've seen it in many fights. It's to be calm and assured and do, this, and this to get you the win. And in that fight, 30 seconds into it, all of that is gone out the window. Like that. Here's the question, right? And we'll get back to experience, I suppose, in a second. Does experience, and not even just necessarily experience, but like when you right, say like Caolan Loughran, his game plan throughout the whole fight was to take him down, take him down, take him down. When something big like that happens, and we're talking about two separate fights here, but when something big like that happens, is it almost survival mode? Like, is it almost like you give up on the fight for a few seconds and have to? And by the time you do that, the fight's almost gone. Like, how tough must that be? Because it's all well and good us talking about experience, us talking about game plans and all. But at the end of the day, there's people going in there getting absolutely punched in the face. And turning points in fights like that must be so hard to deal with, Harry.
So I think in the specific case of Rhys McKee, you said that one of the parts of his game plan is that he's assured, right? Calm and assured. He looked calm, right? He definitely looked calm. Didn't look assured, though. He came out and he looked, not maybe timid is too harsh a word, but he didn't look as confident as he does when he walked out and he fought Jimmy Wallhead. Is that because he knows that this is his second crack at the UFC? Is it because he knows he's on a big European card and he knows that it's a prominent position he's in and there's lots of eyes on him? Is it because something happened in camp? Is it just one of those days where you wake up as a fighter and you're like, today's not the day for a fist fight? Like, because all of those things happen. Now, as we get to it, as you say, experience keeps him in the fight, but I also think cardio keeps him in the fight. But that, again, you can rule to experience. He knows if he's not supremely prepared for a 15-minute fight and something happens, cardio is one of those things that allows you to recover so quickly in comparison to his opponent, who essentially punched himself out on Rhys's face for 2 rounds. And then at the end, Rhys was like, by the way, I'm still here. And Loughran was like, I'm not. So I've now got to survive for these last 4 minutes and attempt to get myself through the fight. And that's a learning experience for Loughran, right? Is that, okay, we didn't get him out of there. One, you either pick your shots better and you do a better job at finishing the fight, or you notice and have a better understanding of, is my man looking to get out of here or is he not? Because the difference was, Rhys McKee was always looking for a way to survive. He was always looking for a way to come back. By the end of the second round, Thiago Moises was not looking for a way to survive and not looking for a way out. He was looking for the referee to save him from the position that he was in. And that's a very tangible, very readable, very obvious line in the sand when it comes to fighting. And so for Rhys, I think the experience certainly led him to that third round. But I also wonder whether his experience led him to the first 2 rounds also, because he knows the tipping point exists. He knows I've got one crack at this again. I'm not getting a third UFC run. I'm getting, this is my one, right? And so I have to go out and I have to perform and I have to do what I want to do. But that probably takes him out of the flow state that he is so used to experiencing in Cage Warriors. Yeah. He eats a big right hand and we are where we are in those first 2 rounds. So as much as experience leads to greener pastures, it can also lead to chaos, right? Yeah,
and we often hear in sports like, there's a young 19-year-old or 18-year-old come through and it's like, they don't understand enough to be nervous type of thing, whereas, Rhys in that position did understand what it's like. I want to talk about Manon Fiorot and Sean Strickland, Israel Adesanya here. I'm going to put the two of them together because I feel like they're relatively similar in terms of they have almost come unscathed, apart from Liam McCourt, who deserves credit for that big win here early in their career, to a championship level almost. Now, Fiorot obviously hasn't got there yet, but she's a fight away from it. Her last 4 fights, Bueno Silva, Maya, Chukagan, Namunis, that's championship level stuff right there. And obviously Adesanya has been a champion for the last while. I find it very interesting, right? You spoke about control there. And the most in control person I think I've ever seen in mixed martial arts was George St. Pierre. And I would argue that the way that people like the three of people I just mentioned, and it's funny how people are probably saying you're putting Manon Fiorot and George St. Pierre in the same sentence, but what she's done over the last few fights has been GSP-like. Now, is it as good as GSP? Not, absolutely not. But her ability to control fights, Adesanya's ability to control fights. Like, I often talk about Adesanya, and it's almost, to me, too controlled, because if we're just talking about mixed martial arts and the sport itself, brilliant. If we're talking about the overall entertainment and all, that's a different story. Now, we'll leave that discussion for another day. But as a fighter, his ability to control fights is absolutely brilliant. Now, sometimes it isn't, against Pereira and against Blachowicz, but the Cannonier fight is a great example of a fight that was, okay, it turned into a terrible fight, but because Izzy was able to control him so well, Vettori, Whitaker, on and on and on. Manon Fiorot has the ability to do that as well. And what's funny is, like, what's Manon Fiorot? I'm just looking here. She's 12 fights into her career. Israel Adesanya is a good few fights. He's 26 fights into his career now, but he's had a lot of fights over the last few years. He didn't have that many fights when he came into his UFC career. I think he's had 15 fights in the UFC now. So when you look at that, Harry, and you see people who. And, we talked about Caolan coming in at the entry level, and I actually want to talk another bit about entry level in a few minutes, but when you see that level of entry to the UFC, which has changed, and now the very top level of control, is that what people should aspire to? Like, everyone can aspire to throwing the best kick or throwing the best punch or having the best takedown or having the best game plan, but is it the level of control in a fight that is what makes you the best fighter in the world?
So I think the name that I thought you were going to mention when you spoke about control was Khabib Nurmagomedov.
I think he was more controlled chaos with Khabib.
Sure. But he didn't lose, right? GSP was in situations where he had to suffer losses and he had to come back and I'm not, let's not do that debate today. But when we talk about controlling a fight, we can also bring in Sergey Ligan versus Sergey Spivak, who controlled that fight from a footwork and stance switching perspective absolutely unbelievably well. Manon Fiorot adopted control in two ways. I think one was very obvious, which was she just waited for Rose to come in, understood that she may not have been the better technical striker, but just realized she was bigger and she could crowd her and she could jam her and she could land harder shots than she was going to. But the second part, and I think actually the more impressive part of control from Manon Fiorot was, and this to me is way above her 12-fight career, is she takes a headbutt. An absolutely astounding cut opens up on the side of her head. Blood is gushing out of the side of her face. Think about what that does to a fighter, right? If you have a cut and you lose a bit of blood, what happens? You feel sick, you feel nauseous, you feel tired, you feel drained. You've got all sorts of feelings rushing through your body. You want to sit down. You don't want to go up against a two-time former UFC world fucking champion trying to take your head off. That's not what you want to be doing. You don't want to be having an athletic endeavor that you need to be at your absolute peak condition for. And yet, at no point did she look phased. She survived the adrenaline dump, the inevitable adrenaline dump, super, super well. She kept her calm, she kept her insurance, and she stood and stuck to her game plan. Now, we can argue about Israel Adesanya's entertainment value inside the cage. What we can't talk about and we can't debate is, as you say, his ability to control fights because of an adherence to his experience, an adherence to his game plan, his adherence to his tactics. The same for GSP, the same for Khabib, right? GSP was, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to beat you in every single range and I'm going to take you down when I'm ready and I'm going to keep you there. Khabib was essentially the same, minus the beat you in every range. He was happy to lose the striking and come on in. Israel Adesanya, the same. He's not going to I can't let you get close, bro. I can't let you get close. Because if I do, obviously potentially Jan Blachowicz things can happen. And so I think when we look at fighters and we look upon their skill set, for sure, their ability to control a fight. And we often talk on the Balance Breakdown and on the preview show about controlling ranges, and ranges both in terms of standing ranges, but also ranges inside the cage itself. There's the center, just outside the center, and then that black tram line, the perilous tram line for any striker that's not Taylor Lapilus or Wilson Gomis, right? And so I think it can't be talked about more about how control leads in a lot of ways to experience. And this is just the final point I'll make. We also think, and we talk about control being ways to win fights. Look at Caolan Loughran. We'll bring that fight back in. He wasn't able to control the fight in a way that he wanted because he just doesn't have the experience yet. If he was able to deter Taylor Lapilus from throwing that jab, or if he had more effective, more efficient, more intelligent counters, the jab in itself, the efficacy of it would have lowered. And you best believe that round 2 would have looked very similar in rounds 1 and rounds 3, but he wasn't able to do that yet. Manon Fiorot, the reason why she is a title challenger in 1 fight, 2 fights, whatever it is because she has that level of control. It's because she's been able to adopt her experience in the cage to not only crowd, beat up, land big damage on a fighter of Rose Namajunas' caliber, but also in the absolute chaos. Rhys McKee takes a massive right hand from Angela Lusa and is on survival mode for 10 minutes. Manon Fiorot has an absolutely gigantic cut opening on her head and still drops Rose Namajunas afterwards. That's the difference.
That's massive, absolutely. The last thing I want to mention here, right, is just our understanding of experience levels as well. Because, we see the reaction the last day Caolan Loughran loses and like, he talked a lot of shit and he's useless. He's not going to... That's an utter and clear misunderstanding of just mixed martial arts and where we are. And I feel like, right, but I say that, but I understand it too, because the MMA landscape has changed a lot over the years. You wouldn't have seen someone as inexperienced as Caolan Loughran in the UFC a few years ago. Like, we have these Road to the UFC cards, we have this Dana White Contender Series malarkey where people are getting to the UFC and it's a little bit too early. And it doesn't mean they're not good fighters. They just got there a little bit too early. And there is a tendency from, some people, and we look, the online chatter is the online chatter. We're never going to fix that. But there's a tendency to not really understand that. And, Manon Fiorot and your next, 3-1 entry fighter into the UFC are looked at the same level when they absolutely should not be. And I feel like the level of understanding we need to get and gain for that is a massive thing. Like, there's no other sport in the world like it, right? Even you could say boxing, but boxing, it never comes to that because they never have to get those tests early in their career. Boxing is almost the perfectly designed sport for not exposing inexperience, right? It's perfect. But in mixed martial arts, specifically in the UFC, we have to realize, but not even specifically in the UFC, right? Here's a great example. Aaron Pico. What a great fighter. Like, a great wrestler, a great striker now, a very good all-round fighter we've seen. And apart from his shoulder, the only thing to ever beat him is inexperience. Now, and some good fighters as well, don't get me wrong, but would Aaron Pico at his peak lose to Zach Freeman, or who was the other one? There was another good fighter in there. I would not think so. So I think we need to just keep that in mind, looking forward and going forward talking about these fighters. Any closing words on that, Harry, or anything else on this whole discussion?
Yeah, I think the difficulty with that, right, is you do get an Erin Blanchfield every now and again, who comes in at 21 years of age and storms through all of her fights and finds a way to win in the fights she doesn't storm through. You do get an Israel Adesanya who, had an incredibly storied background in another combat sport, but drops himself into MMA relatively inexperienced and gets to the title inside 2 years. You do get an Alex Pereira who comes in with absolutely no MMA experience whatsoever and finds his way into a title shot, finds his way into winning a title. So there are outliers that exist, and they do, unfortunately, they're treated more like the norm and more like the standard on the online chatter than what they actually are, which are anomalies. Very
correct.
Special, very rare anomalies. And that's a shame. And that's on us as the media. And that's on, it's not going to be on the UFC because they're going to promote their stars and promote their anomalies as much as possible. But it's on us to promote the people like Sean O'Malley, let's say, who went in, had an amateur career, had a professional career on the regional scene, found his way in through Dana White Contender Series, and then openly said, or even Ian Gary, who comes on and says, I'm not ready for Kamaru Usman right now, but I'm going to be. And I'm going to make sure that when that fight happens, I'm going to be in with a chance of beating him. And so I'm going to take these fights with guys that you don't know, and I'm going to make sure that I grind out performances that you may not even like, but they will stand next to me solid as a rock when I'm ready to compete with Kamaru Usman. Because you then have, and I'll just bring Sean O'Malley back in it because that's who we mentioned. He was like, I'm not fighting any good fighter for the level of money you're paying me. I'll fight Andre Sukumtaths. I'll fight Eddie Winelands. No problem. And I'll just keep racking up experiences and racking up highlight reels because until you're ready to pay me what I deserve for the experience I've accumulated, and that's another angle to this, of course, I'm not fighting those big guys. And if you look at both of them, it seems to have worked out pretty well so far for them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so we should be idolizing those career trajectories, the people that understand the value of experience and what comes with it. We should be idolizing those. That's not to say we shouldn't celebrate the anomalies because we absolutely should. They are rare gems in our sport. But when you take on an amateur or you take on a guy that walks into an MMA gym and says, I would like to be a UFC world champion one day, follow the path of the Sean O'Malley, follow the path of the Ian Gary, where they are cognizantly mapping out a career with which they will get to the top, but they'll get to the top smartly.
100%. And there was, just to finish it up, there was a situation, I think only a year or two ago, where every UFC champion was over 30. Right, and even you look at Sean O'Malley, he's a young UFC champion, he's 28. Adesanya's 34. So it is a thing you need. It's almost a prerequisite to have that amount of experience to get there in terms of just age, but in terms of fights as well. And I suppose an ongoing discussion. I'm glad that we had it, I suppose, kicked off today. Harry, thank you very much for joining me. If you're not following him, please do at BJJ_Harry Powell. You'll find everything that he does right there, and check out his article every Monday morning talking about the great prospects coming through from the weekend over in Severe MMA. And it's good to do a bit of reading as well as a bit of listening, so check that out as well. All right, everyone, we will leave it there. My name is Sean Sheehan for Sherdog.com, and I'll see you all next time.